You know, it's funny, when you look at a band like the Red Hot Chili Peppers right now, in 2026, there's this strange sort of disconnect.
A disconnect. How do you mean?
Yeah, look at the timeline we have laid out. This is a band that is, as we speak, getting ready to work on their 14th studio album.
Right?
They just headlined that huge Fire Aid benefit concert at the Forum in January. They are, for all practical purposes, a legacy act, an institution, like the Stones or U2.
They're rock royalty at this point. They're part of the establishment.
Exactly. But then you dig into the source material, you go all the way back to 1982, 1983, and you realize this global institution started as a literal joke. And I don't mean a ha-ha, we're funny guys kind of joke. I mean a let's get on stage, make some noise, and never ever do this again kind of joke.
It's what you could call the Tony Flo paradox.
The Tony Flo paradox. I like that. Because that's really what we're here to explore today. We want to figure out how that one specific joke, a one-off gig by a group called Tony Flo and the Miraculously Majestic Masters of Mayhem.
What a name.
How did that survive long enough to sell over 120 million records? We're not just here to recount the history. We're trying to find the actual survival gene in this band's DNA.
And to do that, you really have to peel back all the layers of, stadium rock success. You have to go back to the grit of Hollywood in 1982.
Fairfax High School.
Fairfax High. And you have to set the scene, because this is not the glamorous Hollywood you see in the movies.
Not at all.
This is L.A. in the early 80s. It's gritty. It's a bit dangerous. Punk rock is absolutely exploding. You've got bands like Black Flag, The Germs, X.
Right.
But there's also this other thing bubbling up, this undercurrent of funk that's trying to push its way through the noise. And right in the middle of all that, you have three high school friends, Anthony Kiedis, Michael Balsary, who everyone knows as Flea, and Hillel Slovak.
And we really need to pause on Hillel Slovak for a moment, because in so many casual histories of the Chili Peppers, he's treated almost like a footnote.
Yes.
He's the tragedy that happened before John Frusciante. But looking at these biographical notes, that feels like a massive injustice to what he actually brought to the table musically.
Oh, it's a huge disservice. If you listen to any of those very early demos, Hillel Slovak was the sound. He was the architect. He had this totally unique way of playing hard rock riffs, but with a real funk rhythm.
A swing to it.
A swing, exactly. He wasn't just doing the straight power chords like all the punk bands. His playing was syncopated. It was groovy.
So he was the musical architect.
He was. And the drummer, Jack Irons, he was locked in right there with him. So you have this core group, Kiedis, Flea, Slovak, and Irons. They're just kids from the same school. They're getting into trouble. And their friend, the guy named Gary Allen, asks them to open for his band's release party.
And this is December 16th, 1982, at a place called the Grandia Room.
A tiny club. It held, what, maybe 30 people?
30 people, yeah. And
Yeah.
they didn't really have songs, did they? They had an idea, a groove.
They had one song. It was called Out in L.A. And you can't even really call it a song in the traditional sense. It was more of a rhythmic chant. Kiedis wasn't a singer back then.
Yeah.
He was a hype man. He was out front rapping, but not like hip-hop rapping. It was more like this frantic spoken word poetry delivered at 100 miles an hour.
And the visual component. I mean, we have to talk about the energy on stage.
It was pure kinetic chaos.
Yeah.
That's the only way to describe it. They were shirtless. They were sweating. They were literally throwing themselves all over the tiny stage. It was a complete reaction against all the polished, synthesized new wave music that was so popular then.
It was raw.
It was raw, sweaty, human energy. And the 30 people in the crowd went absolutely nuts for it.
So much so that they were asked to come back the next week. But here's where we hit the very first obstacle in this whole survival story. They weren't a real band.
No. And this is such a crucial piece of context. Hillel Slovak and Jack Irons, the architect and the engine of the band, they were already in another group.
A band called What Is This?
And What Is This was their serious project. That was the band with structured songs, with ambitions. The Chili Peppers, or Tony Flo at the time, was just something they did on the side for fun.
Which brings us to the first of many fractures. It's 1983. They get a record deal, a 7-album deal with EMI America.
Which is just insane.
It's insane for a band that had barely been together for 6 months, but at the exact same time, What Is This also gets a record deal with MCA.
So Slovak and Irons, they have to make a choice. And they look at the Chili Peppers, this chaotic, improvisational, unpredictable funk punk mess. And then they look at, what is this? Their, serious band.
And they choose the serious band.
They choose a serious band, they quit.
So Kiedis and Flea are just left there. They have a major record deal, but they've just lost half their band. And not just any half, they lost the two musicians who completely defined their sound.
This is the moment where 99% of bands would just die. Right there. The story would be over. But Kiedis and Flea, they just don't stop. They pivot. They immediately hire Cliff Martinez on drums and a guitarist named Jack Sherman.
Jack Sherman, he's kind of a tragic figure in the band's history, isn't he?
He really is.
Right.
Look, from a technical standpoint, Jack Sherman was a fantastic guitar player. Very skilled, very competent.
But he wasn't Hillel.
He wasn't Hillel. He didn't have that psychic connection with Flea. You have to remember, Flea plays the bass like a lead instrument. It's aggressive. He's popping. He's slapping. He needs a guitarist who knows how to dance around that, not just play on top of it.
And then they go into the studio to record their first album, The Red Hot Chili Peppers, which comes out in August of '84. And on paper, the choice of producer seems like a stroke of genius. Andy Gill.
From Gang of Four.
Exactly. Gang of Four is legendary. They were mixing post-punk with funk before almost anyone else. Flea and Kiedis worshipped them. So you hire your hero to produce your record. What could possibly go wrong?
Everything. Everything went wrong. This is the classic never meet your heroes story, but played out in a recording studio. You see, Andy Gill had a very specific idea of how things should sound. He wanted it to be ready for the radio.
You want a clean line.
Clean lines. He wanted that big, booming 80s gated reverb sound on the drums. He wanted to compress the guitars and tuck them neatly into the mix.
And neat is the last word you would ever use to describe the Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Exactly. They wanted the record to sound like one of their live shows. Dry, punchy, aggressive, everything bleeding into the red. There's a story in the notes here that Kiedis and Flea got into literal screaming matches with Andy Gill over the sound of the snare drum.
Wow.
They felt he was completely sterilizing their sound, taking away the danger.
It's like trying to force a wild animal into a suit. It just doesn't fit. So the album comes out, and the band themselves, they hate it. They've gone on record over and over saying it just lacks the stink of the real band.
And the fans could feel it, too. The whole thing just sounded restrained. And for a band that was built on pure chaos, restraint is like a death sentence.
On top of that, the personal dynamic with Jack Sherman was just falling apart. Kiedis used to call him a nerd to his face. It was just cruel.
It was bullying, plain and simple. They didn't respect him because he didn't come from their specific street background. So even though they played this grueling tour, 60 shows in 64 days, which would break anyone, they fire him in February 1985.
But the universe seems to have a strange sense of timing with this band because right as Sherman is leaving, the What Is This project isn't really working out for Hillel Slovak.
He missed the energy.
Yeah.
He missed the chaos and the spontaneity of the Chili Peppers. Yeah. So Hillel comes back to the band.
And this sets the stage for their second album, Freaky Styley. And if Andy Gill was the control freak producer choice, their next choice was the complete opposite. It was the let chaos reign choice.
George Clinton. Dr. Funkenstein himself.
I mean, talk about a complete pendulum swing. You go from the angular, rigid post-punk of Gang of Four to the absolute master of Parliament Funkadelic.
And the atmosphere in the studio was just night and day. George Clinton didn't care one bit about making something radio-friendly. All he cared about was the groove. He moved the entire band to his farm in Detroit. They all lived together. And Clinton's whole philosophy was, if you want to be funky, you have to live funky.
He encouraged the weirdness.
He demanded it.
Right.
But there was a much darker element that was introduced during this period, too. It wasn't just about musical experimentation.
No. This is 1985, and this is the point where heroin really enters the story as a daily destructive reality for the band.
Right.
During the recording of Freaky Styley, they were using heavily, and George Clinton, well, let's just say he wasn't exactly the person to tell them to slow down.
He was more likely the one encouraging it. So you have this strange situation where they have a huge creative victory. The band felt that Freaky Styley was the first record that truly captured their sound, but commercially.
It was a complete flop. It didn't chart at all.
It's just wild to think about that now. A Chili Peppers album failing to make the charts is unthinkable today. But back then, they were still a cult act. A very niche cult act with a very serious, growing drug problem.
And a continuing problem with drummers. Cliff Martinez eventually leaves, and you can't really blame him, and in his place, Jack Irons comes back. So by 1987, for their third album, The Uplift Mofo Party Plan, you finally have the original high school lineup back together.
The four founders.
Yeah.
But the cracks in the foundation were already becoming huge canyons.
Uh-huh.
And we have to talk about the Rick Rubin rejection here.
Yes.
Because Rick Rubin would eventually become this legendary fifth-member figure for them, the producer, who defined their sound for decades. But in 1987, he took one look at them and walked away.
He did. They approached him to produce Uplift, and he came to one of their rehearsals. He saw the state they were in. Kiedis was nodding off. Their behavior was erratic and unpredictable. And he basically said, I can't work with this. He sensed death in the room.
That is just a chilling detail. When Rick Rubin, a guy who has seen everything the music industry has to offer, looks at you and says, this is too dark even for me, you know you're in a bad place.
A really bad place. They ended up working with Michael Beinhorn, who somehow managed to wrestle a record out of them. And Uplift actually charted. It hit number 148 on the Billboard 200. It felt like they were finally starting to climb.
But gravity was pulling them back down. The tour for that album ends. They come back home to L.A., and on June 25, 1988, the band's survival story hits its absolute lowest point.
Hillel Slovak dies of a heroin overdose.
This wasn't just the death of a friend or guitarist. Like you said earlier, he was the soul of the band. He was the guy Kiedis looked up to.
He was the anchor, and when that anchor is gone, the whole ship just starts to drift. Kiedis' reaction was to flee. He ran to Mexico. He couldn't even bring himself to go to the funeral.
And Jack Irons, he was completely devastated and just done. He blamed the culture of the band for his best friend's death. He quit on the spot, and he ended up being hospitalized for severe depression not long after.
So here we are again. It's just Kiedis and Flea. Two guys struggling with addiction, no guitarist, no drummer. Logically, the story should end right here. Fade to black. The band is over.
But this is where that concept you mentioned, that brotherhood dynamic, really comes into play. Kiedis and Flea made a pact with each other. They decided that the music was the only thing that could possibly keep them alive. So they started looking for replacements.
And they went through some interesting options first. D.H. Peligro from the Dead Kennedys sat in for a bit. Dwayne Blackbird, McKnight on guitar.
McKnight did not last long. I think he played, 3 shows?
Yeah.
And the story goes that when they fired him, he threatened to burn Anthony Kiedis' house to the ground.
Which, honestly fits the chaotic energy of the band at that moment in time. But then destiny, or something like it, walks through the door. An 18-year-old kid who was a massive fan of the band.
John Frusciante.
This is the critical pivot point in their entire story. If Hillel Slovak was the funk architect, what was John Frusciante?
John Frusciante was the melodic painter. He worshipped Hillel, so he knew how to play funk. He could do the scratchy, muted guitar parts perfectly. But he brought something entirely new to the band, which was a deep, almost academic understanding of melody and harmony.
He loved theory.
He loved Frank Zappa and complex chord progressions. He brought a sense of musical vulnerability that they just didn't have before.
He allowed them to write actual ballads.
Exactly. He gave them space to breathe musically. And then when they held open auditions for a drummer and found Chad Smith, this absolute giant from Detroit who just hits the drums harder than anyone, the chemistry was immediate. It just clicked.
So you have it, the classic lineup: Kiedis, Flea, Frusciante, and Smith. They managed to survive the recording sessions for Mother's Milk.
Which were very tense, by the way. Beinhorn was back as producer, and he was pushing them really hard for a hit.
And they got one with their cover of Stevie Wonder's Higher Ground.
Their first gold record. It was a breakthrough.
But the real magic, the moment they go from being a successful band to global superstars, happens when they switch record labels to Warner Bros. And finally convince Rick Rubin to say yes.
Because Rubin could see they were a different band now. Kiedis was getting clean. Frusciante was this incredible new creative force. And Rubin had this brilliant idea. Let's get out of the recording studio.
The mansion
in Laurel Canyon. This big, spooky house that was supposedly haunted. A place where Harry Houdini had once lived. They didn't just record there. They moved in. They lived and breathed the album.
And Rubin's production philosophy was so important. He stripped away all that 80s gloss. He made the record sound incredibly dry and intimate. When you listen to Blood Sugar Sex Magik, it sounds like the band is in the room playing right next to you.
And that intimacy, that rawness, is what allowed a song like Under the Bridge to exist.
A song that almost didn't even make it onto the album. The story is that Rubin was just flipping through Kiedis' notebooks and found this poem about loneliness and scoring drugs in downtown L.A.
And Kiedis was embarrassed by it.
Totally embarrassed. He thought, this is too soft. This isn't funky. This isn't the Chili Peppers.
And Rick Rubin just looked at him and said, it's beautiful. You have to sing it.
That one decision completely changed the band's trajectory. It took them from being the funky monks from LA to being seen as serious artists.
It showed a vulnerability that connected with millions of people. The album sold over 12 million copies.
No.
All of a sudden, they were arguably the biggest band in the world.
And with this band, there's always a but. That kind of massive overnight success is an immense pressure cooker. And Jean Frusciante was only, 21 years old at the time?
21. And he was a pure introvert. He was a guy who cared deeply about art, not about fame or money. And suddenly he's playing in giant arenas, and there are thousands of people screaming, jocks are moshing to his most sensitive personal songs.
He hated it.
He absolutely hated it. He felt that the band had sold out, that the message was being misunderstood. He started to retreat into himself. He started sabotaging their performances.
That Saturday Night Live performance in 1992 is the most infamous example of that.
Oh, it's just painful to watch. They're playing Under the Bridge on live national television, and Frusciante just starts playing these jarring, off-key, discordant notes. He's screaming during the backing vocals. He's actively trying to destroy the song on stage.
Kiedis looks like he wants to physically attack him right there.
And the whole thing finally imploded in May of 1992. They're on tour in Japan.
And John just quits right before a show. He tells them, I'm done, and he flies home.
And this sends him into a personal downward spiral that makes the band's earlier drug problems look almost mild in comparison. He spent the next 5 or 6 years living in total squalor, barely surviving, nearly dying from addiction multiple times.
And meanwhile, the band is this giant machine that's just lost a critical part. They try to keep it moving. They hire Eric Marshall to finish the Lollapalooza tour. They try out another guitarist named Jesse Tobias. But eventually, they land on a big name from the LA scene.
Dave Navarro from Jane's Addiction.
And this begins what some people call the metal years, or the One Hot Minute era. And looking back, this album and this period feel like such a strange detour in their history.
It really is the outlier in their catalog. Navarro is a phenomenal guitarist, but his style is rooted in heavy metal and psychedelic rock. He's all about big riffs, lots of distortion, layered effects.
He's not a funk player.
He's not a funk player, and he's not a less is more player like Frusciante. And you can hear that struggle on the album, One Hot Minute, which came out in 1995. It's a very thick, heavy, dense-sounding record.
It's dark. Lyrically, it's probably their darkest album.
It is, and that's because Kiedis had relapsed during this time. He had a dental procedure, was prescribed Valium, and it just triggered his addiction all over again. So he's writing about the death of his friends like River Phoenix and Kurt Cobain. It's an album full of grief.
It's still sold well. 8 million copies is a huge number, but the chemistry just wasn't there. And by 1998, Dave Navarro was out of the band.
So now we're in 1998. The band is on the absolute verge of breaking up for good. Flea is seriously thinking about quitting music. But then he does something that I think really defines him as a person. He goes to visit John Frusciante.
And John was in a terrible state at this point.
A horrific state. He was living in poverty, he was frail, he had lost all of his teeth due to a severe infection, his arms were badly scarred from his drug use. He was just a shell of a person.
But Flea went there as a friend first.
Exactly. He didn't go there to recruit a guitarist. He went there to save his friend's life. He helped get him into rehab. He paid for him to get new teeth. He helped him slowly rebuild his life from the ground up.
And only after John was sober and clear-headed did Flea finally ask the question, do you want to come back and play with us?
And John just wept. He said, nothing in the world would make me happier. This is the great resurrection story of the band.
And it leads directly to Californication in 1999, and I don't think we can overstate how important this album was. If Californication had failed, the band was finished.
Absolutely. And musically, it was a total reinvention. John's years of addiction had actually damaged the nerves in his arms, so he couldn't play with the same technical fury as before. He had to play simpler.
So he focused on melody.
He focused purely on melody and texture. A song like Scar Tissue is the perfect example. It's so simple, just a few notes on a slide guitar. But it's so incredibly evocative.
And Kiedis' vocals changed, too. This is where he really learned how to sing.
He took vocal lessons. He learned about pitch, about how to hold a note and create a melody with his voice. He wasn't just rapping or shouting anymore.
Yeah.
And that allowed them to write these huge anthemic songs like Other Side and the title track.
The album sold 16 million copies worldwide. It's their biggest seller ever. They were right back on top of the world. But of course, controversy was never far behind them. We have to talk about Woodstock 99.
What a disaster that whole festival was. It was already a powder keg waiting to explode, overpriced water, oppressive heat, a very aggressive mood in the crowd.
And the Chili Peppers were the closing act.
They were. And they decided, somewhat unwisely, to play a cover of Jimi Hendrix's Fire.
Which, in hindsight, was probably not the best choice, given that people in the crowd were literally setting bonfires with pieces of the stage.
No, they were widely blamed in the media for inciting the riots that followed. Kiedis has always argued that the fires were already burning before they played the song, but the optics were just terrible. It was a chaotic way to end the decade.
So as we move into the 2000s, the band enters this very melodic, almost a soft rock phase with the album. By the way, in 2002, this was really John Frusciante's project.
It really was.
Yeah.
He was deep into listening to the Beach Boys, the Beatles, old doo-wop music. He wanted layers of sound, complex vocal harmonies. If Blood Sugar was dry and funky, by the way, it was lush and almost orchestral.
But this created a lot of tension with Flea.
Massive tension. Flea felt completely sidelined. He felt like he had no room to play his funky, aggressive bass lines. He said he felt like a session musician in his own band. He actually considered quitting. They had to have some very serious talks to work through their creative power dynamic. They realized they needed to find a balance between John's melodic genius and Flea's rhythmic power.
And it seems like they found that perfect balance on the next album, Stadium Arcadium, in 2006.
Their magnum opus,
Yeah.
a 28-song double album. It debuted at #1 in the U.S. You've got massive hits like Danny California and Snow, Heyo. It felt like a perfect synthesis of everything they had ever done. It had the funk, it had the rock, it had the beautiful ballads.
It seemed like they were invincible. But the cycle with this band just keeps turning. After that massive world tour, they were completely burned out. They took a long hiatus. And in 2009, John Frusciante leaves the band. Again.
But the context this time was completely different. It wasn't an angry, dramatic exit. He wasn't running away from his demons. He was running towards something new. He wanted to make solo electronic music. He wanted to experiment without the pressures of being in a huge rock band. It was completely amicable.
So the band needed a new guitarist. Enter Josh Klinghoffer.
Josh was really the perfect and only choice. He was already a close friend of the band, especially of John's. He had already toured with them as a backup musician. He knew all the songs. He stepped into what were probably the biggest shoes in all of rock music at the time.
And he held that lineup together for a whole decade. He played on 2 full albums, I'm With You, in 2011 and The Getaway in 2016.
And he brought his own unique style. He was much more of a textural player, using a lot of effects pedals to create atmospheric sounds. And he was there for some huge moments for the band, like their induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2012.
An event which John Frusciante declined to attend.
Right. He sent his well wishes, and he didn't show up. But it was great to see some of the former drummers, Cliff Martinez and Jack Irons, perform with them that night. It felt like the whole extended family was being celebrated.
They also did the Super Bowl halftime show in 2014 with Bruno Mars. I remember there was a lot of controversy because people noticed their instruments weren't plugged in.
That's just the reality of the Super Bowl. They have incredibly strict rules about live audio because the setup time is so short. The vocals were live, but the instrumental tracks were pre-recorded. Flea was very open about it. He wrote a long letter explaining that they did it because it was the only way they were allowed to perform.
The 2016 album, The Getaway, is interesting because it's the first one they did without Rick Rubin since 1989. They worked with Danger Mouse instead.
And you can really hear the difference. It's a bit more polished, a bit more modern in its production. Dark Necessities was a huge hit from that record. It proved they could still be relevant and successful without their usual creative safety nets.
They were touring the world. They even played a show at the Pyramids of Giza in 2019. It really seemed like the Josh Klinghoffer era was a stable, long-term thing. And then, December 2019.
The Instagram post that was heard around the world.
I remember seeing it and thinking it had to be a fake account. The message was so blunt. Josh is leaving the band, John is rejoining, just like that.
It was ruthless in its efficiency, but also very Chili Peppers. When the creative energy shifts for them, they just move. They felt that spark with John was calling them again, and they couldn't ignore it.
And to Josh Klinghoffer's credit, he handled it with incredible grace. He called it a pretty simple decision from their perspective and just stepped aside.
So that brings us into the current era, the third Frusciante era. And the creative output has been just incredible.
Prolific is the word. In 2022 alone, they released 2 massive, sprawling albums, Unlimited Love in April and Return of the Dream Canteen in October. That's over 30 new songs in a single year.
and Rick Rubin came back to produce them. It felt like the whole classic team was back together, and musically, it felt like a return to form. It wasn't them trying to remake Blood Sugar, but that telepathic interplay between Flea and John was back.
They also secured their financial future around this time. In 2021, they sold their song publishing catalog for a reported $140 million.
A very smart move that a lot of legacy artists are making. It lets them focus purely on creating new music, without worrying about the business of the old stuff.
So let's bring the timeline right up to where we are now. We're in early 2026. What's been happening over the last year and a half?
Well, 2024 was mostly a touring year. But in April of 24, Chad Smith mentioned they'd be taking a break from the road to start writing in 2025. Then in August, we saw them perform at the closing ceremony for the Paris Olympics.
That was a cool moment. They played Can't Stop from a Beach in Long Beach, California, as the symbolic handover to Los Angeles for the 2028 games.
It made perfect sense. They are, in many ways, the unofficial musical ambassadors of Los Angeles. Then 2025, for a supposed writing year, was surprisingly busy. In January, they played that Fire Aid benefit at the Kia Forum for wildfire relief.
And then things got a little strange. In May of 2025, they appeared as marionette puppets in an episode of that Netflix anthology series, Love, Death, and Robots.
An episode directed by David Fincher, no less. It was a very bizarre, funny little cameo that just shows they don't take themselves too seriously. Also in May, there was a secret screening at the Cannes Film Festival of a new documentary about their very early years, which was co-produced by Hillel Slovak's brother, James.
We're still waiting for a wide release on that one.
We are. And then as far as new music, in July of 2025, Flea confirmed that writing for their 14th album was officially underway. Then in October, Anthony Kiedis gave that interview on SiriusXM, where he used that very poetic phrase. He said the new wet sands of the next album were beginning to form.
Which brings us to today, 2026. And a nice little side note to start the year. Flea just released a solo album called Honora.
And it features a collaboration with Nick Cave, which is really significant because for years, Nick Cave was famously not a fan of the Chili Peppers. He called their music garbage in an interview back in 2004.
Out.
But he publicly apologized in 2025, and now he and Flea are working together. It feels like a nice full-circle moment of artistic maturity.
Let's take a step back and talk about the artistry itself. We've gone through the history, but what is it that actually makes their sound work? How do you even categorize a band that plays funk, punk, psychedelic rock, and acoustic ballads?
It is a fusion.
Yeah.
But I think the secret ingredient is the way the instruments occupy their own space. In a typical hard rock or metal band, the distorted guitar is taking up almost all of the sonic frequency.
Right.
In the Chili Peppers, Flea's bass is very often the lead instrument. He's the one playing the main melody.
And his playing style has evolved so much over the years. He started out as this pure, aggressive slap bass player.
He was imitating guys like Bootsy Collins from Parliament Funkadelic and punk bassists. But after Blood Sugar, he learned the value of melody and negative space. He learned that sometimes the note you don't play is the most important one.
And John Frusciante's style fits into that perfectly.
Frusciante plays guitar almost like a piano player. He uses these wide open chord voicings. He leaves big gaps for Flea's bass to shine through. They never step on each other's toes musically. They're constantly dancing around each other.
And then you have Chad Smith holding it all together.
Chad Smith is one of the most underrated drummers in rock music. He has the power and volume of a hard rock drummer like John Bonham, but he also has the deep pocket and swing of a great funk drummer. That combination is the engine that makes you want to move.
We also have to touch on the lyrical evolution. The shift from writing about, parties and girls to deep introspection is just drastic.
It completely mirrors their own lives. You can't write a song called Party on Your Pussy, which is a real song title from their early days when you're 60 years old. Kiedis started writing about his struggle with addiction, about loss, about environmentalism. And he writes about California constantly.
California is basically the fifth member of the band.
It absolutely is. He mythologizes the state, the geography, the culture, the darkness that hides underneath all the sunshine. It gives their music a powerful sense of place.
Their public profile has also shifted much more toward activism over the years.
They've always been politically engaged, going back to Rock the Vote in the 90s and the Tibetan Freedom Concerts. They've been very vocal supporters of Bernie Sanders and climate change initiatives. And Flea founded the Silver Lake Conservatory of Music, which provides free music education to underprivileged kids, which is an incredible legacy in its own right.
But it is also important that we acknowledge the legal issues from their past. It hasn't all been positive activism.
No, and it's part of their story. Kiedis was convicted of sexual battery and indecent exposure in 1989. Flea and Chad were arrested for battery at an MTV event in 1990. These things are on the record. They were part of a very chaotic, drug-fueled lifestyle at the time, but that certainly doesn't excuse the behavior. They've apologized for it, but it's a part of their history that stands in stark contrast to the elder statesman persona they have now.
So as we look at them here in 2026, working on what will be their 14th album, what's the final analysis?
I think the final word has to be resilience. Most bands do not survive the death of a founding member. Most bands do not survive their key songwriter quitting twice. Most bands certainly do not survive the level of severe drug addiction that they went through.
It makes you think about that brotherhood concept again, doesn't it?
Exactly. I think the Red Hot Chili Peppers are a band defined as much by who leaves as by who stays. They're a cyclical being. They break apart, they find a way to heal. And the music they make is the sound of that healing process.
That's a great way to put it. The music is almost a byproduct of their survival.
And as long as they're willing to do the hard work to stay together as people, the music just seems to keep coming.
From the Grandia Room with 30 people in the crowd to headlining stadiums 44 years later, it's been an incredible journey to trace. Thanks for listening.